Alright everybody, and welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be doing a repair on the Lemax 2007 Cursed Tomb. Let's get into it. Okay, so the Cursed Tomb, really cool, great theme. I've always absolutely loved the Egyptian stuff. I think it's perfect for Halloween. To be honest, don't have enough of it. They're expensive, what do you want me to say, but they're absolutely awesome, and I'm very slowly starting to acquire them. I believe this would be my second piece, maybe the third of the Egyptian stuff. I think the second. But anyway, I purchased this one because it was discounted for being broken. In full transparency, I bought it off eBay. I think I paid about $60 or so, and they're normally a lot more expensive, but this one had an issue, and kind of a major issue, and my guess is it's probably kind of common for this house, only because there's a lot on this one little mechanism which we're going to be repairing today. So just an overview, the mummy on top is supposed to kind of go in and out, which he did, but the one on the bottom, the mummy on the bottom, the doors are supposed to open when the lights and sound come on. The mummy is supposed to appear, and as the doors open and close, the two giant mummies on each side there, on the left and right, they're supposed to rotate. It sounds like kind of like rocks are crumbling in a sense as they rotate. And anyway, as the doors open, they turn one way, mummy appears, does this thing. When the doors close, they turn the other way. It's actually really cool. The problem is that all of those things, the doors opening and the mummies churning, etc., are all off the same little mechanism. And it all comes down to, believe it or not, this very tiny gear. Now, yes, there is other gears in the house, and you're gonna see that here in a minute, and they all kind of work together. And of course, there's a belt and things like that, which, replacing the belt could also be a common thing. And you're gonna see on this house that the belt's almost ready to be replaced, if not ready. That's an easy thing to do. However, this repair, just in full transparency, is going to be a little bit more in the middle of the moderate scale to, experience to do this one, only because it's a little awkward. It's tight, there's not a lot of room, and everything's kind of just all in one little spot, and it can be a little difficult. But if you can get there, which trust me, you can, the repair itself actually isn't difficult. It's more just tearing the house apart and actually, keeping track of the little screws and understanding how everything works to be able to, ultimately put it back together. So with that said, let's go ahead and start by taking off the black mat on the bottom of pretty much every Lemax house. Very simple. I'm not going to show you the whole process on this. I've done it in other videos, but basically you're just going to take a hairdryer or something not quite as hot as a heat gun, because you could probably end up melting the foam or loosening up some lights or something underneath, but you're just going to kind of go round and round and get it relatively hot until you can start to peel it off. Just a heads up though, it's probably going to tear anyway. Most of them, they tend to tear more than you wish they would, but that's a good thing, because that means Lemax was doing a really good job when they put it together, right? Because they're not exactly meant to be taken apart, so not a big deal. You can just put on a brand new base with some same kind of foam stuff that they use from the craft store. I have a whole video on my channel just about replacing the base, so absolutely no big deal. Just be really careful though when you are scraping it off. A lot of times there's wires underneath and you will cut them, so please be very gentle. Patience is key on this. Okay, so I've pulled off my base. You can see that there's still some foam left around there, but that's no big deal. You can scrape it off later. But anyway, just wanted to kind of get to it here. Briefly, you can see that when you pull it out, you just loosen the glue, a little heat, because they are glued in. So a little heat, and this whole bottom will pop right out. Please, it's very tight. The wires do not have a lot of slack, and if you pull just a little too hard, which is very easy to do, you better get out that soldering gun, because you have to figure out where it goes, and it's just a mess. So anyways, be gentle. You can see there that there's the main circuit board. You can see the belt there in the center. The speaker, the doors, and the little mummy guy, and some screws, lights, etc. And then I wanted to show you also the underneath. So you'll see some gears and some more wires and the motor and all that kind of stuff. And then lastly, the inside of the house. So if you had an LED that went out that you needed to replace, or, fix a wire or access something else, there it is. I have never taken this house apart in full transparency, so we are learning together here. My guess is if you had to work on the top mummy, that maybe it comes out. I just don't know if it comes out from the top or the bottom. A lot of times they come out from the top on those higher pieces, but again, I haven't taken this one apart before, so I don't know. You'd have to experiment, and if you do, let me know in the comments below, because I'm sure at some point or another I'll be working on another one of these at some point. So anyways, so the first thing we're going to do to access the troubled gear is going to be take off the doors. There's 4 screws there, as you can see. And then there's an additional 4 screws on the little white covers that hold the mummy and the little micro switches, etc. I would take off the micro switches as well. Those are the little black switch looking things with very, very tiny screws, just for good measure, because those things are extremely sensitive. So if you can help, with them getting hit or something like that by kind of tucking them back when you're working on this, the better off you'll be. Okay, so once you've done that, you'll be left with what you're looking at here, which is a great time to replace the belt with something like this. And a side note on belts, because I've had this question in the past, to know if they're ready to be replaced, there's a couple telltale signs. They'll be extremely loose, or they're not able to churn anything under any kind of resistance, or you can see here this one's a little kind of out of shape. It's not kind of straight and even. That's a good sign that they're starting to wear. Sometimes you'll see that they have small tears or cracks or shredding, but most of the time they just kind of get too loose, too big, and very simple to replace. And this house, it was working, but there would be no issue with repairing it since I was in there anyway, and would probably be the next thing to go if I didn't. So very simple, you just pop it off each wheel and throw a new one on. So now to the real corporate. I do want to hop in real quick with a quick note though. So what you're looking at here with where the gear is and that little track piece, that little plastic with like the 2 holes popping up, there's actually 2 of those, one for each door, one that sits in the bottom and one that sits in the top. But I had removed the top one that literally just sits there. They're identical. One's just slightly bigger, but I removed it so you could get a better look. If you see here in the middle front, there's a very tiny gear coming through the top in like that little track area there in the front. Sorry, I don't have a pointer. I don't know how to do that on the computer and stuff. But anyways, that is the problem. That gear is cracked. There is a very hairline, small, tiny, smaller than a pinky nail. Okay, this thing is tiny. But anyway, there's a crack, and what's happening is when the belt does all the gears underneath, etc., that one that has the crack, because it's not tight and snug, it's just basically slipping. It's worn out, it's slipping, it can't grip anything or turn anything against any kind of resistance really, which is why you saw earlier that the doors didn't really move all that much. It's just as soon as it feels any kind of resistance, it just basically opens up and it's garbage. So now, where can you get a gear? So there's a lot of places online, eBay, Amazon, hobby stores, which again, I'm not affiliated with any of these. I'm just telling you where you can find them. They come in all different kinds of packs. Maybe that'd be a good topic for another video on how to identify your gear, etc. But in this case, I actually didn't happen to have that exact size laying around. So that put me into a little bit of an interesting place. Now, this house is not for a customer. This was just my own, and sometimes I like to experiment on my own to figure out, what can be done other than just replacing the gear if you don't have it or waiting 2 weeks to get it in or whatever. So in this case, we got a little lucky. So what you're looking at is the gear on the left, which is the original broken gear. As you can see, it's kind of hard to tell, but it's again cracked and some of the teeth are worn and kind of pushed over, one way or the other. And on the right side is a gear that I did happen to have laying around. Now, what's exciting about this is the gear on the right, even though obviously is a lot bigger on the bottom, the gear on top is actually the right gear. It's the same size, teeth, etc. So that made me think like, well, if it'll fit if there's enough room between the gear, with the extra piece on the bottom, the bigger gear on the bottom, and the plates, that it might actually still work. And this is what I'm talking about with getting lucky and trying to make do with what you have. So in our case, turns out that I could take that gear, the one on the right, flip it over, so putting the top of the gear where the small end is into the existing pole, or onto the existing pole rather, where the old gear used to sit, and just let the top of the gear, the big gear, just free flow, just spin on its own, because they're all connected, right? So they're snug and tight because it's the same size pole, that it fits on. But because they're connected, it's just going to kind of free spin. But we're going to get the action from that little gear. And so it fits, it locks in, and it doesn't affect anything by having that bigger gear piece, on top there, or well, in this case on bottom. I know this sounds a little confusing, so you got to kind of just follow, what I'm saying here, maybe rewind and listen to again, because it is a little confusing. But long story short, you're basically going to use the little gear that's sitting on top there, and just let the bigger round gear that is connected to just spin, because it's not going to touch anything or affect anything. And if it fits and doesn't cause any problems, then there's no issues, right? So that brings us to what you're looking at now. So as you can see, I have pulled out the small gear, just pulls off, and I put the other gear, the big gear that we saw, right back on the pole, and I just put it on upside down. So the little gear is still where the other one was, and this bigger gear is just floating. And you can see that both tracks are on for each door, one for each door that I told you I took off earlier, and it works just fine. So if it works, there's no problem. So replacing the belt, throwing on the gear that I had laying around, we are problem free. So keeping with good maintenance, I would recommend now maybe greasing it up. So you'll see me here just taking a little bit of white grease. I'll try to look up the name here and put it on the screen for you. But anyway, it's just a grease I think I picked up from like Harbor Freight, kind of like an all-purpose kind of thing. And I'm just greasing the areas where things slide or touch, the doors, the track, all that kind of stuff. No big deal, just as I'm putting it back together, just adding some extra grease. Because the truth is, any resistance is wear and tear on the gear over time. So if a little bit of grease goes a long way and saves you having to open it back up anytime soon, then why not? Okay, so I've put it all back together here. We are kind of back to where we started. I'm just testing it to make sure everything's functioning right. As each door opens and closes, it hits a micro switch, to indicate to the board that, it's done its job. It's working flawlessly. This gear thing worked great, yeah, maybe it's not the perfect gear, but the truth is it worked perfectly. So, sometimes using what you got will save you a little bit of money and not even have an issue. And the truth is, this gear, because it's bigger, there's, it's plastic still, but it's bigger and more heavy duty. Who knows? Maybe it's even going to last longer. So I think all in all, it was a good decision. So the last thing I want to touch on now is the final step when putting it back into the house, the whole unit here. As you see on each side of the doors, there's like those little gray plastic things sticking up, those like where it looks like something would latch onto, and it's because it does. So in the house, when you're putting it back together, you're going to see on the top left and right these little plastic, plastic poles, I guess you could call them, with some holes in them. Anyway, there's one on each side, and they just literally, as you're putting the house back together, they sit on each of those gray poles, and that's what allows the mummies, the big giant mummies, to rotate as the doors open and close. So very simple. When you're putting it back in, the little white poles with the long holes in them, as you can see here, one on each side, goes right onto those little gray posts on the doors. So sounds way more complicated than it is, but just, when you're putting it back together, just make sure they go on, correctly. And you'll know instantly if it works, because, if the mummies don't churn, they're not connected correctly. But again, it's very easy to do. Okay, so we're all back together. It's working beautifully. It looks stunning, and I can't wait to get it into our village this upcoming season. Like I said before, I'm definitely going to continue to collect the Egyptian style stuff, as well as everything else, but I really want to get more of this style. It's just perfect for Halloween. I love the themes and the details that they put into it, and I do hope to review this piece at some point in the future. But for now, I thank you so much for continuing to watch my videos. It means so much to me. It's such a joy to be able to be a part of this wonderful community and share these things with you and vice versa. At the end of the day, like I said before, love what you do and never be afraid to try. So until next time, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next one.